The first time I realized my family had already erased me, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room, watching my younger brother sign papers that should have had my name on them. My phone buzzed once in my lap. A text from my mother, Karen Whitfield. "We're proud of him. Please don't make this awkward." That was the moment. Not when I felt it, when I understood it. Before I tell you how it ended, with lawyers, locked doors, and a family business that no longer had my last name on the sign, do me one thing. If stories about betrayal, family drama, and quiet revenge pull you in, tap like, subscribe, and stay with me. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now let me tell you how this really started. My name is Emily Whitfield. I was 31 years old when my parents decided I was no longer part of their future. On paper, I was the successful one. Senior operations manager at a logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio. 8 years with the company. I oversaw budgets north of $12 million annually. I paid my own mortgage. No debt. No scandals. No excuses. In my family, that made me invisible. My parents, Robert and Karen Whitfield, ran a regional manufacturing company called Whitfield Industrial Components. Small enough to be family-owned, big enough to bring in real money. My grandfather, Harold Whitfield, built it from a rented warehouse in the 70s. When he died, my father inherited the company, and with it, the assumption that one of his children would too. That child was never me. My younger brother, Jason Whitfield, was 28. Charismatic, disorganized, loud. The kind of man who failed upward because people liked him. He'd worked at the company on and off since college, mostly in sales, mostly leaving messes other people cleaned up, including me. I didn't work at Whitfield Industrial. Not officially. But for years, I might as well have. When their accountant quit suddenly, I rebuilt their reporting system on weekends. When a supplier threatened litigation, I reviewed contracts late at night after my real job. When cash flow tightened during COVID, I helped restructure debt without charging a cent. Karen used to say, "Emily just helps out. She's good with numbers." Jason, meanwhile, was learning leadership. It was always temporary. Just until Jason grows into it. Just until he's ready. I told myself I didn't care, that my life was separate, that I didn't need their approval. That lie worked until the email arrived. The subject line read, "Special board meeting, succession planning." It came from Thomas Keller, the company's outside attorney. I recognized the name because I'd helped him once, quietly, fix an internal audit problem no one else understood. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. at Whitfield headquarters. Succession planning. No one had mentioned this to me. Not my father, not my mother, not Jason. Still, I put in a personal day at work and drove the 40 minutes north. Part of me believed, stupidly, that this was finally it, that after years of being useful but unacknowledged, I would be included. That belief lasted until I walked into the room. Robert Whitfield sat at the head of the table, Karen beside him, Jason across, relaxed, confident. Thomas Keller to the side, with a leather folder already open. No extra chair. "Emily," my father said, surprised but not displeased. "You came." "You sent the invite," I replied, placing my bag down. "I thought I should be here." Karen's smile was tight. "Of course. Just listen for now." That should have been my cue to leave. Instead, I sat. Thomas cleared his throat. "As discussed, today we're formalizing the transition plan. Effective immediately, Jason Whitfield will be appointed Chief Operating Officer, with full authority over day-to-day decisions. Upon Robert Whitfield's retirement, Jason will assume the role of CEO and majority shareholder." Jason grinned. My father nodded. I waited. Surely this wasn't all of it. Thomas continued. "We'll also be amending the trust to reflect the updated ownership structure." That's when I spoke. "What about me?" The room went quiet. Not shocked, just inconvenienced. Karen looked at me the way you look at a cashier who asks too many questions. "Emily," she said softly, "this isn't personal." "It never is," I said. Robert sighed. "You have your own career. Jason needs this. This company needs continuity." I laughed once, short and humorless. I've been providing continuity for years. For free. Jason finally met my eyes. Don't make this weird. You know you don't even like the business." That was news to me. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Legally speaking, the decision has already been executed. The documents are signed. Signed. Past tense. I looked at the folder in his hands. My name wasn't on anything. So that's it, I said. I'm excluded. No shares, no role, no acknowledgement. Karen folded her hands. You'll still be family. I stood up slowly. My legs felt steady. My chest did not. Then why does this feel like an eviction? No one answered. As I walked out, my phone buzzed again. A second text from my mother. Please don't ruin this for your brother. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the engine off and realized something terrifyingly clear. They hadn't just chosen him. They had planned around me. And whatever came next, they assumed I would accept it quietly. They were wrong. I didn't know yet how far I'd have to go to take back what they erased. I only knew that the life I thought I had in my family ended in that room, and something colder took its place. That night, I made one phone call that changed everything. I didn't go home right away. I drove past my exit and kept going until the highway thinned out and the city fell behind me. By the time I pulled into a grocery store parking lot I'd never been to before, my hands were still steady. That surprised me. I kept waiting for the shaking, the panic, the urge to call someone and ask if I was overreacting. None of that came. What I felt instead was a quiet, dangerous clarity. They hadn't forgotten me. Forgetting would have been careless. This was deliberate, thought out, executed while assuming I would play my assigned role. The reasonable daughter, the supportive sister, the one who never made things uncomfortable. I sat there and replayed the meeting in my head, not emotionally, but strategically. Who spoke? Who didn't? What was said out loud and what was implied? Thomas Keller's folder already open. The documents already signed. The language Karen used. This isn't personal. Jason needs this. Not we decided. Not we discussed. Needs. I went back to my apartment just before dark. A 2-bedroom townhouse I'd bought 3 years earlier on my own. Quiet street, good schools nearby. The kind of place my mother once described as a starter home. I dropped my keys on the counter and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was pull up my old emails. Years' worth of messages between me and Whitfield Industrial. Financial projections, risk assessments, vendor negotiations, late night, just a quick question, notes from my father. Panicked Sunday morning requests from Jason when he'd forgotten a deadline. I hadn't kept them out of sentimentality. I kept them because I'm methodical. By midnight, I had a folder labeled Whitfield Support. There were more than 400 emails. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. If this ever became a fight, I wasn't starting from nothing. The next morning, my father called. Emily, he said, his voice measured, as if we were discussing the weather. Your mother told me you seemed upset yesterday. Upset implies surprise, I said. I wasn't surprised. He paused. We didn't think you'd take it this way. This way how? Personally, I closed my eyes. You cut me out of the family business without a conversation. You executed legal documents that affect my future and didn't even tell me. How exactly did you expect me to take it? You're independent, he said. You've always been strong. There it was. The compliment that was really a justification. Jason needs guidance, I said. I provide results. That's the difference. He didn't deny it. Your brother is building a family, Emily. A legacy. I laughed quietly. I've been building one too. You just didn't want to see it. Karen took the phone. Her tone was softer, practiced. Sweetheart, we hope you'll still come to Christmas. None of this changes how much we love you. I said nothing. Emily, she prompted. Tell me something, Mom. When did you decide? A pause too long to be innocent. Last spring, she said finally. Last spring. While I was helping them renegotiate a supplier contract that saved them nearly $200,000. You never planned to include me, I said. Karen sighed. You always make things sound so harsh. After we hung up, I sat very still. Last spring. That meant something else had happened around that time. Something I hadn't questioned because I didn't think I needed to. I opened a new browser tab and searched Public Business Records. Whitfield Industrial Components, LLC. There it was. Recent amendments. Ownership restructuring. New operating agreements. Jason's name. My father's. A trust I didn't recognize. And then something else. A holding company listed as partial guarantor on a line of credit. Northridge Holdings, LLC. I frowned. I'd never heard that name before. I searched it. Registered 18 months ago, Delaware. Anonymous ownership. But the address listed for correspondence was familiar. My parents' home. I sat back slowly. They'd been planning more than succession. I made another call. This one I'd been putting off for years. Her name was Eleanor Whitfield. My grandmother. My father's mother. 82 years old. Sharp as a blade when she wanted to be. She'd always lived 3 states away, by choice. She answered on the second ring. Emily, this is a surprise. I didn't call to chat, Grandma. Good. Neither did I, she said. What did they do this time? That was the moment I realized I wasn't crazy. I told her everything. The meeting, the documents, Jason's promotion, my exclusion. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. They finally did it without you in the room, she said. Finally? Emily, she said. Your father has been trying to push you out of that company since you were 25. I gripped the phone. Why? Because you scare him, she said plainly. You don't need him. That hit harder than anything else. Your grandfather wanted you involved, Eleanor continued. He saw you. He left instructions, not promises, instructions. My pulse picked up. Instructions for what? For his estate. I stood up. Grandma, what are you saying? I'm saying there's a will, Emily, and parts of it were never meant to be handled by your parents. I thought of Thomas Keller's folder, the trust amendments, the urgency. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because your father asked me not to, she said. He said it would confuse you. I closed my eyes. Do you know where it is? I asked. Of course I do. I wrote it. My grandmother had been a paralegal for 40 years before retiring. Emily, she said carefully, if they're moving this fast, it means they're afraid of something. Afraid of what? Of you finding out you have more power than they told you. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from anxiety, from anticipation. Because for the first time since that meeting, I understood something crucial. I wasn't behind. I was simply being kept in the dark. And darkness only works until someone turns on the light. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single page, a copy of a trust summary, and my name printed clearly where it was never supposed to be seen. I read it twice before my phone rang. It was Jason. Hey, Em, we need to talk. I smiled, slow and cold. Yes, I thought. We really do. Jason didn't sound nervous on the phone. That was the first thing that bothered me. He sounded confident, casual, like a man who believed the ground under his feet was solid. Hey, Em, he said. You free later? Thought we could grab coffee, clear the air. Clear the air was family code for get you back in line. I agreed anyway. We met at a place he liked downtown, all exposed brick and over-roasted beans. The kind of cafe where he felt important. I arrived early, chose a table near the window, and ordered tea. My hands were steady again. That was becoming a pattern. Jason walked in 10 minutes late, sunglasses still on, phone pressed to his ear. He waved without looking at me, finished his call, then slid into the chair across from me. You look good, he said. You been working out? No, I said. I've been paying attention. He laughed, assuming it was a joke. Look, Em, he said, leaning back. I know you're upset about the business stuff, but Dad and Mom did what made sense. For who? For the company. For the family. I stirred my tea slowly. Funny how those two things never include me. Jason sighed like I was exhausting him. You've always been dramatic. There it was. The word they used when they didn't want to answer. I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it on the table between us. His eyes flicked to it, then away. You know, I said, Grandma Eleanor wrote Grandpa Harold's will. Jason froze for half a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. So she doesn't forget details, I continued, or intentions. He shrugged. Wills get updated. Not. I slid the page out. Just enough for him to see the header and the highlighted line. His smile faltered. Where did you? From someone who didn't lie to me. He leaned forward now, voice dropping. Emily, you shouldn't be digging into this. That trust is complicated. It's very simple, I said. Grandpa wanted equal ownership split between his grandchildren, contingent on involvement or demonstrated competency. Jason scoffed, That's ancient history. Ancient history that was never executed, I said. Instead, Dad created a new trust, Northridge Holdings. Without telling me, his jaw tightened. You weren't supposed to know about that. I smiled. That's what scares you. Jason's voice sharpened. You don't want to do this. You'll tear the family apart. I tilted my head. You mean the family that cut me out quietly and hoped I wouldn't notice? You always think you're smarter than everyone else. I am. Then what is? I leaned. The point is that you signed documents you didn't fully understand. And Dad used a structure that only works if I stay silent. His face drained of color. You're bluffing. I wasn't. I finished my tea, stood up, and gathered my bag. Tell Mom and Dad I'll still come to Christmas, I said. I want to see how this plays out. Jason grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, angry. Don't do this, Emily. I met his eyes. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain. You already did, I said, and pulled away. That afternoon, I met with Thomas Keller, not at the office. At his request, at a quiet restaurant across from the courthouse. He looked uncomfortable when I arrived. Emily, he began, folding his napkin. I didn't expect to see you involved in this. That makes one of us. He exhaled. Your father instructed us to limit communication. I know. There are things you don't understand about how this was structured. I placed my folder on the table. Inside were printed emails, financial spreadsheets, legal citations I'd researched myself. Then explained to me why Northridge Holdings was used as a guarantor on a personal loan secured by company assets. He stared at the folder. And explain, I continued, why my grandfather's will was never fully executed. Thomas's shoulders sagged. Your father said you'd complicate things. No, I said. I'd correct them. He rubbed his forehead. Emily, if this goes public, it will get ugly. I thought of the parking lot, the meeting room, my mother's text. It already is, I said. You just pretended it wasn't. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I hadn't expected. There is a codicil. I looked up sharply. A supplemental clause. It was triggered by a specific condition. What condition? If any heir was intentionally excluded through deceptive restructuring. My heart didn't race. It settled. Where is it? I asked. Filed separately, with the probate court. It was meant as a safeguard no one mentioned. Your father assumed you'd never find it. I smiled faintly. He underestimated the wrong person. Thomas hesitated. Emily, if you invoke this, it will force a review of the entire succession plan, including Jason's appointment. That's the idea. He studied me. You know this could cost you your relationship with them. I thought of Eleanor's voice. Calm, clear, unafraid. I already lost that relationship, I said. I just hadn't named it yet. That evening, a group text. We need to talk, as a family. Robert. Immediately. Jason. I looked at the messages without replying. Then I forwarded them to Eleanor. Good. It's time. 3 days later, a formal notice was delivered to Whitfield Industrial Components. A petition for review, filed in my name. By the time my parents realized what I'd done, it was already out of their hands. And that was when they stopped asking me to be reasonable and started getting scared. They didn't. That's how I knew the notice had landed exactly where it was supposed to. When people think they still have control, they argue. When they realize they might not, they go quiet. 3 days. On the 5th morning, I arrived at work to find an envelope taped to my front door. No stamp, no return address, just my name, written in my mother's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. We need to resolve this privately. You are embarrassing the family. No apology, no denial, no explanation, just embarrassment. I folded the paper and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't throw it away. I wanted to remember the exact moment when concern for reputation mattered more than concern for truth. That afternoon, my father showed up unannounced at my office. I was in a meeting when the receptionist buzzed me. Your father is here. He says it's urgent. I took a breath. Of course he came to my work. Control looks for witnesses. Tell him I'll meet him in 10 minutes, I said. When I walked into the lobby, Robert Whitfield was pacing in front of the elevators. His posture was stiff, his jaw tight. He looked older than I remembered, smaller. Emily, he said sharply, what have you done? I gestured toward the seating area. Let's sit. I'm not here to sit. Then you're not here to talk, I replied. He stared at me. then sat. "You filed a petition," he said. "Do you have any idea what that does?" "It triggers a review," I said. "You know that. You dragged the company into court. Number 1, I invited the truth in." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're making a mistake. Jason's appointment is legal." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not. Karen called me last night," he continued. "She hasn't slept. That wasn't my problem. Your mother is heartbroken. So was I." He clenched his fists. "You always do this. You hold grudges." "I don't hold grudges. I hold records." "Remember April 2021, I asked? When you asked me to restructure the supplier debt? It saved you $212,000. He looked away. "And last fall, when Jason missed the regulatory filing deadline? I covered it. Quietly. You did what family does." "Family tells the truth," I said. "Family doesn't rewrite wills in secret." He slammed his hand on the arm of the chair. "Enough. What do you want?" There it was. The question that always comes when leverage shifts. "I want what Grandpa intended," I said. "And I want it acknowledged publicly." He laughed bitterly. "You think this is about fairness?" "No," I said. "This is about consent. You didn't give me a choice." Robert stood abruptly. "If you push this, you'll destroy the company." I stood too. If the company can't survive transparency, it deserves to fall. His face went red. "You're being vindictive." I met his eyes. "You taught me to protect my interests." He left without another word. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Thomas Keller. "Emily," he said carefully, "your parents are requesting mediation." "Already?" "They're concerned about exposure." I smiled. That was the right word. The mediation was scheduled for the following Monday. Neutral office, neutral mediator, neutral ground. Nothing about it felt neutral. Karen arrived first. She looked composed but brittle, like porcelain under pressure. Jason followed, jaw set, eyes darting. My father came last, face carved into something hard. They all froze when they saw who was sitting beside me. Eleanor Whitfield didn't stand. She didn't need to. My grandmother wore a simple gray coat and carried a leather binder that looked older than Jason. Karen's mouth fell open. "Mother, what are you doing here?" "Protecting my granddaughter," Eleanor said. "Something you failed to do." The mediator cleared his throat. "Let's begin." Robert leaned forward. "This is unnecessary. We can resolve this internally." Eleanor opened her binder. "No," she said calmly. "You can't." She slid a document across the table. The codicil. I watched my father read it. Watched his confidence crumble, line by line. Karen covered her mouth. Jason's foot bounced under the table. "You knew about this," Jason whispered to me. "No," I said. "You just assumed I didn't." The mediator adjusted his glasses. "This document is valid. It mandates a review of asset allocation if deception is proven." Karen's voice shook. "We never meant to deceive." "Intent isn't required," Eleanor said. "Impact is." Jason slammed his palm down. "This is insane. Emily doesn't even work at the company." "She worked for it for years," Eleanor said. "Without pay, without credit." The mediator turned to me. "Emily, what resolution are you seeking?" I spoke evenly. "An audit of the restructuring, restoration of my grandfather's intended share, and formal acknowledgement of my role in the company's past operations." Robert scoffed. "That would undermine Jason." I looked at my brother. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "If Jason earned his role," I said, "he'll survive scrutiny." Silence. The mediator nodded slowly. "These requests are reasonable under the circumstances." Karen's composure cracked. "Emily, please, think of Christmas. Think of family." I thought of every birthday forgotten, every achievement minimized. "I am thinking of family," I said. "I'm just not sacrificing myself anymore." The meeting adjourned without resolution. As we stood to leave, Jason hissed, "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but not for the reasons you think." That night, I received an email from Thomas Keller. Subject: Audit Initiation. It had begun. And with it, something my parents never prepared for. Other people started asking questions. The first question came from someone my parents couldn't ignore. It wasn't from a lawyer or an auditor. It was from the bank. 3 days after the audit was initiated, Whitfield Industrial's primary lender requested an updated disclosure packet. Full ownership structure, Guarantors, trust documentation. Routine, Thomas Keller called it when he left me a voicemail. Nothing about the tone of his voice sounded routine. I found out about the bank's inquiry because Jason called me at 11:30 that night. His voice was tight, sharp around the edges. What did you tell them? I hadn't told anyone anything. That was the beauty of it. I told the truth, I said. And the truth has a way of spreading. You knew this would trigger a review. Yes, you knew the bank would panic. Number 1. I knew they'd verify. There was a crash on the other end of the line, like something being thrown. You're doing this on purpose. I let the silence sit. Jason, I said finally, did you read the guarantor clause when you signed the restructuring documents? Another silence. Longer. That's what I thought. He hung up without saying goodbye. The audit moved faster than anyone expected. Once auditors start pulling threads, they don't stop because a family feels uncomfortable. They follow paper. And Whitfield Industrial had years of messy paper. Vendor payments rerouted through Northridge Holdings. Personal expenses coded as operational costs. Loans rolled over without proper disclosure. Not illegal in isolation. Suspicious in combination. Karen left me 3 voicemails in one afternoon. I didn't listen to any of them. I read the transcripts instead. Please call me. We can fix this. You don't have to destroy everything. The words were always the same. Everything. Never me. At work, my own life continued with eerie normalcy. Meetings, deadlines, performance reviews. My director congratulated me on a successful quarter. I smiled and thanked her, then went back to my office and stared at the wall for a full minute. I realized something then. My parents had always assumed I needed them more than they needed me. They were wrong. On Thursday, Eleanor invited me to her house. She lived in a quiet town outside Lexington, Kentucky. Old trees, brick sidewalks, a house full of history, and none of the noise I'd grown up with. We sat at her kitchen table drinking tea. Your father came by yesterday, she said, not looking at me. I waited. He asked me to withdraw the codicil. I laughed softly. And? I told him, no. Did he threaten you? He tried. She smiled faintly. I reminded him who taught him contract law. We sat in silence for a moment. Emily, she said carefully, there's something else you should know. I looked up. Your grandfather didn't just leave instructions about ownership. He left a letter. My breath caught. A letter. She stood and walked to a cabinet, pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. He asked me to give it to you if this ever happened. If what happened? If they pushed you out. My hands were steady as I opened it. Emily, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I was right about your father. I read it slowly. Every word felt deliberate. He wrote about watching me balance checkbooks at 12, about how I asked questions instead of accepting answers, about how strength doesn't always look like dominance. He apologized for not intervening more while he was alive. And then the line that settled into my bones. You were not meant to inherit comfort. You are meant to inherit control. When I finished, Eleanor watched me quietly. He knew, she said. He always knew. On my drive home, my phone rang again. Thomas Keller. The auditors found inconsistencies, he said. They're expanding the scope. What does that mean? It means the succession plan is on hold. I pulled over. On hold? How? Jason's appointment is suspended pending review. For the first time since this began, I felt something shift. Not triumph. Balance. Later that night, Karen called again. I answered this time. Emily, she whispered, your father is furious. I imagined him pacing, shouting, grasping for authority. He should be. You've humiliated us. I exhaled slowly. You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped covering it up. Please, Karen said, think about Jason. I did. Constantly. He built his confidence on a foundation that wasn't his. Now he was standing on it while it cracked. The next morning, an internal memo circulated at Whitfield Industrial. Interim Leadership Restructuring. Temporary Oversight Committee. Jason Whitfield, removed from operational authority until further notice. By noon, my phone was blowing up. Cousins, aunts, people who hadn't spoken to me in years. What's going on? Is it true? Did you really do this? I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded one message to Eleanor. It has started. Her reply came quickly. Good. Let it finish. That evening, Jason showed up at my house. Unannounced. Uninvited. He stood on my porch, eyes wild, pride stripped bare. "You think you've won," he said. I stepped into the doorway, but didn't invite him in. "No, Jason. I think I've finally stopped losing." He stared at me, chest rising and falling. "You don't know what Dad is capable of." I met his gaze, calmly. "Neither do you." And that was when I realized something else. My parents weren't the only ones hiding things, and the next truth to surface would hurt far more than the first. Jason didn't come inside. That told me more than his words ever could. He hovered on the edge of my porch, like someone afraid of crossing a line he knew he couldn't uncross. "You don't know what Dad is capable of," he repeated, lower this time. I folded my arms. "I grew up with him. I know exactly what he's capable of." He shook his head. "No. Not this." "Then tell me," I said. "For once, don't protect him." Jason hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the street, then back to me. "He's been moving money," he said. "Not just the way you think. Before the audit." I waited. Silence makes people fill it. "Northridge Holdings isn't just a buffer," Jason continued. "It's a sink. Stuff goes in and doesn't come back out." "Personal stuff?" Jason laughed bitterly. "If only." He leaned closer. "Dad's been covering losses. Bad ones. From years ago." "What kind of losses?" Jason swallowed. "Gambling. Not casinos. Private investors. High-risk stuff. He thought he could outplay the market." I closed my eyes for half a second. "How much?" "I don't know the full number. But enough that if the auditors follow the trail, it's not just embarrassment. It's criminal." That explained the speed. The secrecy. The urgency to install Jason and shield Robert. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because if he goes down," Jason said quietly, "he'll take everyone with him, including me." I studied my brother's face. For the first time, I didn't see entitlement. I saw fear. And something else. Guilt. "Did you know," I asked, "about the gambling? About any of it?" Jason hesitated too long. "I knew something was wrong," he admitted. "But I didn't ask questions. I just did what he told me." "That's the difference between us," I said. "I always asked." He nodded, defeated. "You need to be careful, Emily. Dad won't go quietly." I stepped back. "Then neither will I." Jason looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing me without the family script for the first time. "If this explodes," he said, "you'll lose them forever." I thought of Eleanor's letter, of the meeting room, of my mother's note taped to my door. "I already have," I said. Jason left without another word. The next morning, the auditors escalated again. This time, it wasn't just financial. Corporate governance review, fiduciary responsibility, conflict of interest, words that make banks nervous and lawyers careful. Thomas Keller called me twice before I picked up. "Emily," he said, strained. "Your father has retained separate counsel." "Of course he has." "They're pushing back hard, claiming the codicil is outdated, that Eleanor unduly influenced your grandfather." I smiled faintly. "They always go after the woman." "I wouldn't recommend appearing surprised," Thomas said. "It's going to get ugly." It already is. That afternoon, my mother finally showed up. Not at my house, at my workplace. This time, I didn't make her wait. Karen Whitfield stood in the lobby, clutching her purse like a shield. Her hair was perfect, her lipstick untouched, but her eyes were hollow. "Emily," she said, voice trembling, "please." I led her into a small conference room and closed the door. She sat, hands folded, posture straight. Years of social conditioning on display. "We raised you better than this," she said. "Did you?" Her lips pressed together. "This isn't how family behaves." "Family doesn't lie for decades," I replied. "Family doesn't erase one child to protect another." She looked at me then. Really looked. "You were always so capable," she said. "You didn't need us the way Jason did. That wasn't love. That was convenience." Tears filled her eyes. "We did our best." "Your best left me invisible." She reached for my hand. I pulled back. "Emily," she whispered, "if your father is exposed, everything collapses. The house, the company, Jason's future." I leaned forward. "And what about mine?" She didn't answer. That was the answer. Karen stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. "If this goes to court," she said, "people will judge you." I nodded. "I know." After she left, I sat alone for a long time. That night, Eleanor called. Your father tried to access the trust account, she said calmly. Tried? The bank flagged it. Froze everything, pending review. I exhaled slowly. He's desperate now, she continued. Desperate men make mistakes. 2 days later, the mistake came. A junior auditor found an inconsistency buried deep in Northridge Holdings filings. A transfer that didn't match any approved expenditure. 6 figures. Routed to an offshore account. Not a hedge. A hideaway. The auditors notified the bank. The bank notified regulators. And suddenly, this wasn't just about succession anymore. It was about fraud. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You think you're protected. You're not. I stared at the screen, heart steady. Then another message came in. From Ellen. They opened a formal investigation. I sat back on my couch, the weight of it settling in. This was no longer a family argument. This was consequences. And the next time my father spoke to me, it wouldn't be as my parent. It would be as someone who realized, far too late, that he had underestimated the wrong daughter. The first time my father spoke to me after the investigation opened, he didn't call. He sent a letter. It arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday morning, stamped and heavy, like it wanted to be taken seriously. I let it sit on my kitchen counter until the coffee finished brewing. I didn't rush. Nothing about this deserved urgency anymore. Inside was 4 pages of carefully worded denial. Robert Whitfield did not admit wrongdoing. He did not acknowledge deception. He expressed concern for reputational harm. He warned of irreparable damage to family relationships. He suggested, delicately, that I reconsider my actions for the sake of unity. There was a single line that mattered. If you withdraw the petition and cooperate, we can resolve this without involving authorities. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That afternoon, Thomas Keller called again. His voice had changed. Less measured, more cautious. Emily, I need to be clear about something. This is no longer a civil matter. I know. Regulators have subpoena power. They're pulling bank records going back 10 years. Good. He exhaled. You don't sound surprised. I wasn't. I'd been waiting. When people like my father lose control of the narrative, they don't adjust. They double down. They hide more. They lie better. Until they don't. That evening, Jason texted me. Dad thinks you set him up. I replied once. He set himself up. Minutes later, my phone rang. Jason again. He's convinced Eleanor manipulated you, Jason said, that you're being used. I leaned back against the couch. Jason, I said calmly, the only manipulation in this family is pretending I don't see patterns. You could still stop this. I already did, I said, years ago. I stopped letting him decide my value. He didn't respond. 2 days later, the story leaked. Not to the press. Not yet. To the industry. Whispers first. Then emails. Then off-the-record calls. Whitfield Industrial under regulatory review. Leadership instability. Potential financial misconduct. My director pulled me aside at work. Emily, she said gently, this wouldn't happen to involve your family, would it? I met her eyes. Yes, she nodded. Thank you for telling me. That was it. No judgment, no fee. I realized then how different my real world was from the one I'd grown up in. In my world, transparency wasn't a threat. It was currency. At Whitfield Industrial, everything slowed. Orders paused. Vendors asked questions. The oversight committee tightened access. Jason was effectively sidelined, left attending meetings without authority, nodding while others decided. Karen called me late one night. Emily, she said, exhausted. Your father isn't sleeping. Neither did I. For years. He's not well. I paused. Is he seeking help? Silence. Then number. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. The following week, regulators requested interviews. Not with me. With Eleanor. With Thomas Keller. With Robert Whitfield. The day my father was scheduled to appear, Jason showed up again. This time, he didn't knock. He sat on my front steps like a teenager who'd been locked out. I opened the door and looked down at him. He didn't look up. He's scared, he said quietly. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. He should be. Jason rubbed his face with both hands. They found the account. I nodded. I know. He finally looked at me. He's saying it was temporary. that he meant to return it. I almost laughed. "Jason," I said, "when you hide something, it's because you know it's wrong." He swallowed. "Mom keeps asking if you'll talk to him." I thought of the letter, the warnings, the conditional offers. "No," I said. Jason nodded slowly. "I should have listened to you," he said. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. 2 days later, Robert Whitfield resigned from his position as CEO. The announcement was brief. Health reasons, personal matters. The Oversight Committee assumed interim control. The bank froze additional accounts. And the regulators didn't close the file. That was the moment Karen stopped calling. Silence can be loud when you've lived your whole life inside noise. A week after the resignation, Eleanor invited me back to Kentucky. This time, she didn't make tea. She poured bourbon. "You did what he couldn't," she said, raising her glass. "What's that?" "You told the truth without needing permission." We drank in silence for a while. "He's going to blame you forever," she said eventually. "I know, but he won't touch you," Eleanor added. "Not legally, not financially." "Why?" "Because the codicil gives you standing. And because if he retaliates, everything he's hiding becomes evidence." I nodded. "Emily," she said softly, "what happens next is your choice." That night, as I drove home, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "This is Agent Michael Reyes with the State Financial Crimes Unit. I'd like to ask you a few questions." I pulled over. Of course you would. The interview was scheduled for the following week. When I hung up, I sat in the dark. Engine off, heart calm. This was the line. The one you don't cross unless you're ready for everything on the other side. I thought of my mother's face, my brother's fear, my father's pride. I thought of the letter from my grandfather, control. I turned the key and drove home, because whatever came next, I wasn't backing away from it. And somewhere, deep down, I knew my father was finally realizing something I'd understood all along. The daughter he tried to erase was the only one strong enough to end this. The interview took place in a federal building I'd driven past 100 times without noticing. Concrete, glass, no signs of drama, just process. Agent Michael Reyes met me in the lobby precisely at 9 a.m. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, dark hair, neutral expression. He didn't offer sympathy or suspicion, just professionalism. "Emily Whitfield," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming in voluntarily." I shook it. I didn't have a choice. "You always have a choice," he replied. "Most people just don't like the cost." That was the first thing he said that mattered. We sat in a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a recorder placed carefully between us. He explained my rights, asked if I had counsel. I told him my attorney, Laura McKenna, was available if needed, but that I was willing to answer questions. He nodded, pressed a button. "Let's start simple. Tell me about your role in Whitfield Industrial Components." I told the truth. All of it. What I did, when I did it, why I did it. I didn't dramatize. I didn't editorialize. Facts are more dangerous than emotion. He asked about Northridge Holdings. I told him what I knew, what I suspected, what I had only recently learned. He asked about my father. I described him the way you describe weather. Patterns, history, predictability. When the interview ended, Agent Reyes turned off the recorder and leaned back. "You understand," he said, "that cooperating doesn't insulate you from scrutiny." I nodded. "I'm not asking for insulation." "Good." He stood. "Because based on what we're seeing, this isn't going away quietly." Outside, the air felt lighter, not because things were over, because they were finally honest. 2 days later, Karen came to my house again. This time, she knocked. I opened the door and found my mother standing there, without makeup, without her armor. She looked smaller, older, like someone who'd been holding herself together with habits instead of strength. "May I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I didn't remember giving her. "Your father is blaming everyone," she said. "The auditors, the lawyers, you." I sat across from her. "That tracks. He says you wanted this, that you planned it." I didn't correct her. Karen looked at me, eyes searching. "Did you?" I thought about the parking lot, the envelope, Eleanor's letter. "I planned to stop lying for him," I said. "What happened after that wasn't something I controlled." She nodded slowly. Jason moved out yesterday. I raised an eyebrow. He said he needed space. From all of it. I didn't comment. Karen's voice dropped. He keeps asking what we did wrong. I held her gaze. Do you want an honest answer? She hesitated. Then yes. You taught him that his comfort mattered more than my truth, I said. And you taught me that silence was the price of belonging. Tears slid down her face. I never meant to hurt you. Intent doesn't erase impact. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. He may be indicted, she whispered. I knew. They might take the house. I knew that too. Karen looked up sharply. Is there anything you can do? I paused. There it was again. The reflex. The reach. I can stop lying, I said. That's what I can do. She nodded, defeated. Before she left, she turned back. Your grandmother says you're strong. Just like him. I smiled faintly. He taught me how to survive, not how to disappear. After she left, I sat alone and listened to the quiet. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The following week, Whitfield Industrial announced a full leadership transition. External management. Asset review. The family name quietly removed from the company website. Jason texted me once. I didn't know who I was without it. I didn't reply. I understood the feeling too well. Eleanor called that night. The board wants to speak with you, she said. I straightened. About what? Your future role. I exhaled slowly. They're asking whether I'd consider joining the oversight committee. Long term. I laughed once. Soft. Disbelieving. After everything? Especially after everything, Eleanor replied. You already did the job. You just weren't paid for it. I didn't answer right away. I thought of my life, my career, the clean distance I'd built. I'll think about it, I said. Do that, she replied. And remember, control isn't about staying. It's about choosing. The next morning, the news broke. Local first, then regional. Manufacturing executive under investigation for financial misconduct. No names yet. But everyone knew. My phone stayed quiet. That was when I knew the worst was still coming. Because silence isn't peace. It's the moment before impact. And the person I least expected was about to break it. The silence broke with a knock I didn't expect. Not from my parents, not from Jason, not from a lawyer or an investigator. From my aunt. Linda Whitfield had always been the family's neutral ground. My father's younger sister. The one who hosted Thanksgiving. The one who said things like, let's not get into that, when conversations drifted too close to truth. She stood on my porch on a Sunday afternoon, holding a pie like a peace offering. Emily, she said carefully, I hope this isn't a bad time. It wasn't a good one either, but I stepped aside. She set the pie on the counter and looked around my kitchen, taking in the clean lines, the quiet. I could see her recalibrating. This wasn't the chaos she'd expected. I heard about the investigation, she said. About your father. I waited. There's something you should know. That sentence again. Everyone suddenly had something I should know. We sat at the table. Linda folded her hands, then unfolded them, then folded them again. Your father didn't act alone, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Not in the beginning, she took a breath. After your grandfather died, there was pressure. From cousins. From extended family. Everyone assumed Jason would inherit eventually. Your father felt cornered. So he decided to corner me instead, I said. Linda winced. He convinced himself you didn't want it. That's not what I mean. She leaned forward. There was a meeting, years ago, before Northridge, before the trust changes. A family meeting. Who was there? Your parents, me, 2 uncles, and the attorney at the time. My stomach tightened. How to consolidate control, Linda said quietly. How to prevent fragmentation of ownership. And me? Linda's eyes dropped. Your name came up. Came up how? As a risk. They said you were too independent, too difficult to manage, that if you ever had leverage, you'd challenge decisions. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. So they planned to make sure I never had leverage. Linda nodded. I stared at the table. The grain in the wood looked suddenly sharp, defined. Why tell me this now? I asked. Because your father is telling people you orchestrated this out of spite, she said. And that's not true. No, he's rewriting history. Again. Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. "This is a copy of the meeting notes," she said. "I kept them. I don't know why. I just did." I unfolded the paper. There it was. Dates, names, language stripped of emotion, concern over Emily Whitfield's influence, recommendation to limit future access. My chest didn't tighten. It steadied. "Thank you," I said. Linda swallowed. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "So am I." After she left, I scanned the document and forwarded it to Laura McKenna, my attorney. Her response came within minutes. "This changes things." It proved intent. Not speculation, not interpretation. Planning. The next call came from Agent Reyes. "We've identified corroborating testimony," he said, "including internal notes." I closed my eyes briefly. There will likely be charges filed within the month. Against my father. Against anyone else? He paused. Possibly. Jason? Another pause. That depends on cooperation. I thought of my brother sitting on my steps, saying he should have listened to me. I said nothing. That night, Jason called. He sounded exhausted. "Aunt Linda told you, didn't she?" "Yes," he sighed. I didn't know about that meeting. I believed him. That was the tragedy of Jason. He benefited from plans he didn't make. "They used both of us differently," I said. "I don't want to testify against him," Jason said. "He's still my dad." I closed my eyes. "Then don't lie for him," I replied. "That's all anyone's asking." Jason was quiet for a long time. "If I tell the truth," he said finally, "everything falls apart." I thought of the letter. Of control. "Then it was already built on a lie," I said. 2 weeks later, the indictment came down. Robert Whitfield. Financial fraud, misrepresentation, concealment of assets. Local news this time. Names printed, faces shown. My mother didn't call. Jason didn't either. Eleanor did. "It's done," she said. "They can't undo it now." I sat on my couch, watching the evening light fade. I didn't feel relief. I felt finality. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. They wanted my answer. Not about the investigation. About whether I would step in, take control. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that feared my influence had handed me the moment they tried to erase me. I had 1 week to decide, and whatever I chose next would define more than a company. It would define what I did with the power they were so afraid to give me. The boardroom looked different when I walked into it, knowing I didn't need permission to be there. Same long table, same muted gray walls, same framed photos of factory floors and ribbon cuttings lining the hallway. But the energy had shifted. Power always does when it changes hands. There were 8 people seated when I arrived. None of them were Whitfields. External directors. Interim executives. A restructuring consultant named Daniel Morris, introduced to me by Eleanor as someone who doesn't care about your last name. That was reassuring. "Emily Whitfield," Daniel said, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming." I took the seat offered at the head of the table. Not intentionally. It was simply the closest. "We won't waste your time," Daniel continued. "You've been asked here because you already understand this company better than most people in this room." A murmur of agreement followed. "The board would like to formally offer you a position as Chief Operations Officer, with a pathway to interim CEO pending regulatory clearance." I sat still. This wasn't triumph. It was an accounting. "You're aware," Daniel went on, "that accepting this role will make you a visible figure in ongoing proceedings. Public scrutiny, media interest, family backlash." I nodded. "I'm already visible." One of the directors leaned forward. "There's another matter. Compensation. Equity." I met his gaze. "Let's be clear. I'm not here for optics." "Good," he said. "Neither are we." They slid a folder across the table. It outlined salary, authority, voting rights, and equity. Real equity, in line with what my grandfather had intended. I closed the folder without reading every page. I didn't need to. "I'll accept," I said, "on one condition." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Full transparency. All financials. No protected corners. No legacy immunity." A pause. Then nods. "Agreed." The vote was unanimous. By the time the meeting ended, the sun had shifted across the windows. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. "Jason." I didn't answer. Not yet. The announcement went out the next morning. Whitfield Industrial Components appoints Emily Whitfield as interim COO amid restructuring. My last name, printed cleanly. No explanation. No family framing, just a role. The comments came fast. Industry chatter, former employees reaching out, a few congratulatory notes from people I barely knew. And then, the backlash. Karen called. "Emily," she said, voice brittle. "How could you?" I closed my eyes. How could I what? Step into his place. It's not his place, Mom. It never was. You're benefiting from his downfall. I paused. No, I'm correcting his decisions. He's your father. And he broke the law. She inhaled sharply. You're choosing a company over your family. I chose myself, I said. The company came with it. She hung up. Jason called later that night. I answered this time. So it's true, he said. Yes. He laughed quietly. I guess that makes you what he always feared. I didn't respond. I talked to the prosecutor, Jason continued. I told them everything I knew. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I said. He was silent for a moment. I don't know who I am without the company, Em. I understood that more than he knew. You get to find out, I said. That's not a punishment. He exhaled. Maybe. We hung up without saying goodbye. The next week was a blur. Audits, meetings, late nights rebuilding systems I'd once fixed quietly from the outside. This time, I didn't do it invisibly. I fired 2 executives who had known more than they claimed. I renegotiated supplier contracts. I froze discretionary spending that had once funded ego instead of growth. Some people were angry. Some were relieved. The company didn't collapse. It stabilized. That mattered. On Friday afternoon, Laura McKenna called. They've offered a plea deal, she said. Your father is considering it. I leaned back in my chair. What does it involve? Admission of guilt, restitution, reduced sentence. And me? She paused. You're not named. At all. Good. Do you want to submit a victim impact statement? I thought about it. No, I said. I don't want to speak at his sentencing. Why not? Because I've already said everything that matters with my actions. That evening, Eleanor came by my office. She looked around, amused. You always did belong at the center of things, she said. I smiled faintly. I never wanted the center. Just a seat at the table. She studied me. Are you at peace? I considered the question. No, I said. But I'm not angry either. She nodded. That's usually what comes right before peace. When she left, I stayed late, alone in the building. I walked through the halls, past old photos, past my grandfather's name etched into a dedication plaque near the entrance. I touched it lightly. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they'd handed me proof of my value, of my steadiness, of my refusal to disappear. And still, this wasn't the end. Because power doesn't just change structures, it changes relationships. And the final reckoning wouldn't come from the boardroom or the court. It would come at a place they never thought I'd control. Home. The house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, unchanged in all the ways that mattered. Same brick facade, same oak tree in the front yard, same porch light my mother used to leave on when I drove back late from college. I hadn't been back since the indictment, until the letter arrived. It came from Laura McKenna, forwarded with a short note. You should see this. Attached was a copy of a property filing. Robert Whitfield's assets were being reviewed as part of restitution. The primary residence was listed, and then there was the addendum. Previously transferred interest subject to clawback review. I read it twice. Then I called Laura. Explain. Your father transferred partial ownership of the house 3 years ago, she said. To Northridge Holdings. Of course he did. He used it as collateral for one of the loans. The transfer was quiet. No notification to family. So the house isn't really theirs. Not fully. And depending on how the court rules, it may be liquidated. I thought of my mother, sitting at the kitchen table, telling me to keep the peace. When will they find out? I asked. Soon. I didn't go there to gloat. I went there because I needed to see it once as an adult who no longer needed approval. Karen opened the door when I knocked. She looked startled, then tired. Emily, may I come in? I asked. She hesitated, then stepped aside. The house smelled the same. Lemon cleaner and something baked. Muscle memory tried to soften me. Robert wasn't there. He's meeting with his attorney, Karen said, voice flat. We sat in the living room. The furniture was unchanged, carefully maintained, like a museum to choices they never questioned. "They're taking the house, aren't they?" she asked quietly. I didn't lie. "It's possible." She nodded slowly. "He never told me," she said, "about the transfer." "I believe you." Karen looked at me, eyes rimmed red. "I thought if we protected Jason, everything would be fine." I folded my hands. "You protected comfort, not people." She flinched. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Do you hate us?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I just don't trust you." She nodded. "That was worse." "He asked me to call you," she said, "to see if you'd help." "Help how?" "Buy the house. Or delay the sale. Something." I leaned back. "Karen," I said gently, "this house was never my responsibility." She nodded again. "I know." But she didn't know what came next. The next day, the court ruling came down. Restitution approved. Asset liquidation authorized. The house was listed. Karen didn't call. Jason did. "They're packing," he said quietly. I closed my eyes. There was one thing left to decide. Eleanor called that evening. "You could buy it," she said, "if you wanted." I knew. Through a holding company. Quiet, clean. I stared at my window, watching the city lights. "Why would I do that?" I asked. "Because you can," she replied. "And because sometimes control isn't about punishment. It's about choice." I didn't answer right away. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I called Laura. "I want to make an offer," I said. "Through an LLC." She paused. "For the house?" "Yes, but with conditions. I drafted them myself. 30-day notice, month-to-month lease, no ownership illusions. They would live there only as long as they respected the boundary." When Karen received the notice, she didn't scream. She sat at the table and cried. When Robert found out who owned the LLC, he didn't call. He sent another letter. 4 pages again. Accusations. Betrayal. "How dare you?" I didn't read past the first paragraph. Instead, I drove to the house one last time. Not to confront, to reclaim. I walked through each room slowly. The hallway where I'd waited for permission. The kitchen where my mother had told me not to upset my father. The staircase where I'd learned to walk quietly. I stood in the doorway of my old bedroom and felt something finally loosen. I wasn't taking it back. I was letting it go. As I locked the door behind me, I realized something quietly powerful. The place that once defined my smallness no longer had any power over me. And that was the real end of it, or so I thought. Because there was still one conversation left. One that would close the circle for good. The last conversation didn't happen in a courtroom or a boardroom. It happened on a park bench. I was walking the trail near my apartment on a cool Saturday morning, the kind where the air feels clean and deliberate. I saw him before he saw me. Robert Whitfield sat hunched on the bench near the pond, hands clasped, staring at the water, like it might explain something if he looked long enough. I could have kept walking. I didn't. He looked up as I approached. For a moment, I saw confusion, then recognition, then something like defeat. "Emily," he said. I sat at the far end of the bench, leaving space between us. "You didn't answer my letters," he said. "I didn't need to." He nodded, as if he'd expected that. "They're taking everything," he said. "The company, the house, my name." I watched the water ripple. "Names don't get taken," I said. "They get revealed." He let out a bitter laugh. "You always had an answer." Number 1. I always had clarity. You just didn't like it. We sat in silence for a while. Ducks moved across the pond, unbothered by human consequence. He cleared his throat. "You didn't have to go this far." I turned to him. I went exactly as far as the truth required. He looked at me then, really looked. Not as a problem, not as a resource, as a person. "I thought you'd be loyal," he said quietly. I was. To myself. He swallowed. "You know," he said, "your grandfather always said you were dangerous." I smiled faintly. He meant capable. Robert shook his head. "I tried to protect this family. You tried to control it." There was a long pause. He finally said, "I don't know how to be your father anymore." I stood. "You never learned how," I said, "and I'm done teaching." He looked up at me, eyes wet. "Is there anything I can do?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said. "Take responsibility. Not with me, With yourself. He nodded, slow and small. I walked away without looking back. That was the last time I saw him. A month later, the plea deal was finalized. No trial, no spectacle, just consequences. Karen moved out of the house quietly. She didn't ask to see me again. Jason sent a message. I'm in therapy. I think that's good. I hoped it was. Whitfield Industrial stabilized under new leadership. My role became permanent. Not because of my last name, because of my work. Eleanor visited once more, standing in my office, looking out over the city. You ended a cycle, she said. I nodded. Someone had to. She smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. That mattered. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. If it resonated, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Especially if you've ever had to choose yourself over family. You're not alone. Here's what I learned. Family doesn't get a free pass to hurt you. Loyalty without boundaries is self-erasure. And revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like quiet control, patience, and letting the truth do the damage. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped protecting a lie. And in doing so, I finally gave myself the life I'd been denied. Take care of yourself. And if you ever feel invisible, remember this. The people who fear your voice are the ones who know how powerful it is once you start using it.